So once again, I've got my pear here, I've got my reference image in front of me, and I am still working with that golden green, just kind of making it as accurate as I can to what I'm seeing, still leaving my highlight areas white, but making my color more specific with each little bit that I add at this point. The color and the value, I should say. So this little divot here is going to get some pretty dark coloration with this color. Still fading up into that highlight area. So you'll notice that each layer I do, the highlight section gets smaller and smaller because each layer is kind of a lighter layer working towards that highlight. I don't want to have too much white on the piece, but I also don't want to cover the white too quickly because the white colored pencil will not completely go over anything that I put on it at this point. So I do want to make sure that I'm careful around that highlight so that I don't make anything so dark that I lose the highlight. So this area is pretty dark with this golden color. There's a little bit of this golden color in the middle of that highlight, so I'm just going to gently put some of that in there. And remember, when you are shading, directional line will really help create volume and roundness. So if I'm working on a rounded part, as I currently am, you'll see that I actually curve my line. Because what that does is just enhance the curve of the thing that I am shading. And so I'll do the same thing up here going into the highlight that is part of the reflected light. Kind of blending out so that nothing is too abrupt, but still rounding out that shading to effectively create the roundness of the pear. So once again, all I've done in terms of the highlight thus far is just leave the paper white. Eventually, I will go into that with a white colored pencil, which is not a necessary step, but I do find that it tends to help a little bit. And now I'm going into this sort of darker shadow area with my golden green once again, to kind of make it match my reference image more. Still fading it out into the next value so that I don't end up with anything abrupt, because I do not want it to look like my pear is metallic. I want to make sure that the matte skin of the pear is quite obvious in what I am doing. And this shadow kind of comes across the pear diagonally here, pretty dark, and then starts to go down into that divot. So I'm just going to bring some of that into the coloring a little bit more. But then continue to make sure that I fade that into each value, whether it is darker or lighter. This portion here is pretty much all this type of value. So I'm just going to extend that down. Now there will be some times where your pencil may not accept the color quite as well. If that happens, do not try to like dig into the paper and color more. Just kind of skip over it and come back to it. Because if you dig into the paper more to try to make your color darker, chances are you will end up making it worse than having a wee little white spot. So this kind of golden green is going to come out towards my reflected light here. So as you can see, there's almost no red visible anymore, but you can tell that it is there because there are places where the green is darker and kind of warmer. And then this is going to very lightly go right over that reflected light, kind of softening that edge a little bit here. So then I'm going to bring some of this color into this edge, turning my page so that I've got the tip of my pencil along the outer edge of the pear to keep that nice and crisp and clean. And then kind of fading that across into that next area. Lightening this up so that it gradually goes up towards that reflected light. Then working back into my highlight area here with some of those lighter values before I get to white. Right now, this highlight area is still a bit bigger than what I want it to be. But as I was mentioning before, I'm not quite ready to work into my lightest light value yet. I'm close. But I still have a little more layering up to do with some yellow mixed into this sort of golden green. And then I'll start using some white in there to really get closest to my highlights before I actually use the highlight white. So once again, at this point, it's very close to the highlight color, but not quite ready for it yet. And remember, even once you do the highlight section, you can still continue working back into areas where you have shadows, because chances are, since the shading is completely relative to other parts of the piece, as you are working into your highlights, you will find areas where you need to add more red, or areas where you need to add more of that darker green, or even areas where you need to add a completely different color altogether. So a big part of learning how to shade is being able to recognize when you need to kind of work backwards a bit and go back to adding shadow spaces and being able to identify which colors actually need to be in that space. Because right now, looking at this, I know I've got to put more red up here and maybe even some blue in this particular part to make the values what I really need and want them to be in terms of accuracy. But before I do that, I would go ahead and at this point go in with a little bit of white to just keep my highlights nice and white, and also some yellow, once again, to blend the green into the white. And then I would go over that portion of the pair one last time, increasing any shadows as needed.